Hello, everybody. This is the Bob Unger Show, and we have a very honored guest today. His name is Rabbi Michoel. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Michoel Green, and he is a Lubavitch rabbi. Some of you may know about Chabad, and they are from Lubavitch, where it emanated from in Europe. Like many Hasidim. And I first came across Rabbi Cohn on social media. And it was pertaining to the COVID. Some people call it a pandemic, some people call it a plandemic, and some people call it a scamdemic. But I noticed that right away he was an independent thinker. And unfortunately, independent thinkers are rare. So I thought that I would try to get him on, and I have conversations with all independent thinkers, as long as they have what I call intellectual integrity. And as far as I can see from what I've seen on social media, Rabbi Michoel Green has intellectual integrity, which for me is a big compliment to give. And I appreciate you, Rabbi, very much. I admired you from afar, and now I actually get to meeting you. So tell us a little bit about your background, and then we'll start to get into some of the issues.
Sure. Thank you, Bob. I'm honored to be here. I am an ordained Orthodox rabbi. Went through the Lubavitch yeshiva system. I was ordained by Rabbi Pinchas Hirschsprung from Montreal. And I've served in the rabbinate, in the Orthodox rabbinate, for over 25 years. I actually, my first position was actually in Poway, in Rancho Bernardo, California, something like 23 years ago.
Where the shooting took place.
Yes, where the shooting took place. In fact, Lori Kay was a dear friend of ours. She came to my wife organized the Mommy and Me, and she brought her daughter Hannah. She used to play with my daughter, so. We knew her very well.
My friend Jeremiah Babe, B-A-B-E, who's a Christian, went to that Jewish center after the shooting and stood in front of it with high-powered weapons for the entire.
Wow.
He just felt the need to go there and to protect the Jewish people. And he and I became friends, and he has his own YouTube channel.
Wow.
See him, Jeremiah Babe, and I think he even has a picture of himself with a Kalishnikov standing in front of the Jewish center there.
Yeah.
And
wow.
He's not Jewish, but felt a need to want to protect those people.
Wow, good for him. That's amazing.
Small world.
Sure. So anyway, so we've been in Massachusetts. We moved here to Westboro maybe something about maybe 18 or 19 years ago. We wanted to start a Chabad house in a grassroots type of Chabad house, not necessarily working for a big synagogue, which is what I had been doing previously. And our travels brought us to Westboro, Massachusetts, and we've been here ever since. We service the community, the broader community of Massachusetts, of the area, the surrounding towns that we live in, and it was only until about a year ago, or maybe a little over a year ago, until about a year ago, I was always kind of private in my own political views and medical views, and I was just a typical Chabad rabbi giving classes in Tanya and Torah and trying to make minyanim, and then something happened, something very substantial changed in my life. I would say July or August of 2019, when I started reading the horrific reports of over 10,000 children, Jewish children being thrown out of private schools, private Jewish schools in New York, and something like 25,000 public school children and other, I don't know how many thousands of more children in Catholic schools. We estimated well over 40,000 children were banned from school last year. And I wrote an email to a couple of friends who were rabbis, prominent rabbis in New York, And when I heard their apathetic response, I said, like, enough is enough. Someone's got to speak out. And I that was the beginning of my, as they say, coming out, and I wrote an op-ed in the Jewish press, and I started
coming out in a kosher way.
In a kosher way, yeah. and ever since then, I've been regarded by lots of rabbis as a troublemaker, as a whistleblower, and I can't say. And now in the COVID era, I continue to do the same. I say it as I see it, and I say that in shul, and I'll blast it from social media, by emails, and it comes with a cost, because people it ruffles a lot of people's feathers, and it's not easy being a Chabad rabbi trying to service a community and nurture a Jewish community when there are lots and lots of people who see things differently than I do, and but I've unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, I've never let that hinder me. I mean, within the past year or so,
it's interesting. A lot of the rabbis, the rabbinate, they will say to me, "We don't mix Torah with politics," and I always respond, I want to get your reaction, that right and wrong is Torah. It's not politics, because you're not talking about Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton or Obama. You're talking about principles of right and wrong from Torah.
Right.
That's not politics. And I think people terribly confuse those two concepts. If I talk about immorality, what are you going to do? Call the Ten Commandments politics?
Yeah.
Or is it Torah?
Mm-hmm.
So what is your reaction to that?
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I completely agree with your assessment. There have been times that I've always talked about the issues with staying out of identifying political candidates or parties. They always made it pretty clear, and I've been threatened in the past by only by very far to the left liberal Democrats who threatened me that they're going to notify the IRS that I'm doing political, speaking about political things, and so I've been always very careful not to mention names, but I think that what we're dealing with now is there's no rabbi, no Jew, no human being is permitted to remain silent, because we are experiencing like an unprecedented. I would call this gzeira shmad in Hebrew. Are you familiar with that expression?
No. I come from a deformed background.
No worries. So don't we all? I think that we're living in times of unprecedented persecution. There's a concerted assault on religious rights going on over the past however many years, intensified many times the past year, and now we have with COVID. It's like a religious persecution. Similar to what took place in communist Russia. A lot of people will argue that COVID policy is targeting all religions and lots of other businesses too, and lots of other things. They're not only going against Judaism per se, but let's put that aside for a moment. What's his name? What's your governor? Your mayor?
You had to remind me.
Sorry. Whatever his name is. Okay, those guys are anti-Semites. That's clear. No one will dispute that. No reasonable person will dispute that. But even the public health ideologues that have created this policy, they've declared religion. They deemed it non-essential. Now, what I like to tell Jews, and especially Chabad people, and you might appreciate this. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with this, with Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson. Have you heard of him?
Of course.
Okay, so he was the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. He passed away in 1950, and he lived in a time over just exactly 100 years ago, when it was actually 100 years ago in 1921 when the persecution, when the Soviet persecution of Jews really began to they did a little bit before that, 1919, 1920, but mainly 1921, and do you know? I mean, you might know. I don't know. It's an interesting historical tidbit. I don't know if you're aware of this. That there was some terrible, deadly typhus plagues, that, outbreaks that took place in Russia in 1919 and then again in 1921. And the flagship Chabad yeshiva, which was called Yeshivas Tomchei Tmimim, at that time it was in Rostov. I don't know how many hundreds of boys, young men, were in the yeshiva at the time. All but 2 got sick with typhus. Typhus was a deadly disease. All of the staff got sick with typhus, and the Rebbe himself, the previous Lubavitch Rebbe, Yosef Yitzchak, himself was sick with typhus, and he was teetering between life and death. It was very serious, and not for 1 minute did the yeshiva close its doors. Not only that, the government was trying to force the yeshiva to close, and the yeshiva and the previous Rebbe said absolutely not for 1 second. The yeshiva, there was sick beds. Everyone was sick. There were 2 boys, and I merited to meet one of the boys. His name was Eliezer Nanas. He lived until his ripe old age of 103 or 106. I met him once. I was once sitting next to him on an airplane, and I had a whole conversation with him. This was he was a young student then, and he and another yeshiva student were taking care of all of the deathly ill students in the yeshiva and Rabbis. And the reason why he wasn't sick was because he already had the disease in the 1919 outbreak, or maybe it was 1918, I don't remember which year. But the yeshiva did not close. Now a lot of people will argue that what's happening now is not religious persecution because it's across the board. But I'd like to remind you and your listeners that in the Soviet Union did not single out Judaism either. The Soviet Union simply said it was Marxist, just like your governor and your party that dominates your state over there. It's the same Marxist idea, and they declared religion to be non-essential, and because it's non-essential, therefore it's counter-revolutionary, because during the times of the revolution we're focusing on the essentials, and we're going to eliminate the bourgeoisie, we're going to eliminate the capitalism, and we're going to eliminate religion because it's an opiate and it's non-essential. And they did that, and they started shutting down churches and all religious, all houses of worship. And then what happened was they started shutting shuls down too. Of course, Jews started opening underground minyanim. But then what happened was you had a group of Jewish youth, unfortunately. They were called the Yevsektia, the Yevrei Sektia. It's called the Jewish section of the Communist Party. And they went after Judaism with a vengeance. And they unleashed the full fury of the Soviet Union in the early 20s, in the mid-20s. Then, of course, Stalin, Yamach Shemai, when he came to power in 1927, and then it was like Stalinism, as we, and they were, dragging Jews out of basements and prohibiting and closing mikvahs down, and if you dared to teach, and they said, oh, you're allowed to teach Torah and alphabet and religion to your own children in your own home, but you're not allowed to teach anyone else's children. You have to socially distance. You have to distance other Jewish people. You cannot go to shul. You can daven in your house with your family, no problem. We're not against religion. We're just against public gatherings, public display of religion. And do you know what happened was that most of the rabbis at that time were just like the rabbis you mentioned earlier. They said, look, we can't call this a Gzeira Shma. The Soviet Union is being consistent. They're against all religion. So the rabbis at that time, the great rabbis at the time, just they encouraged their adherents to leave, just simply to leave, not to stay in the Soviet Union, and to leave if they were able to. And this was in the early days of the Soviet Union, so it wasn't what we called later the Iron Curtain. It was still possible to leave, and a great majority of Orthodox Jews and rabbis left. They left the Soviet Union. Those who were able to leave left. There was one rabbi who refused to leave, and he told his adherents not to leave. And he stood up and he refused to cooperate with the Soviets. And that was Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, and the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he insisted on religious freedoms. He insisted that by Soviet law, by Russian law, they were assured of their religious freedoms. And he said that these policies are unjust and illegal and illegitimate. And he continued to inspire his followers, Hasidim, Lubavitcher Hasidim in Russia, to teach Torah to children, and he had a whole network of underground yeshivas, and they were teaching children Torah to thousands of children, and of course the Soviets didn't take kindly to that. They tried to shut him down. They went after Hasidim, Chabad Hasidim with a vengeance, and ultimately they realized they had no choice but to eliminate the Rebbe himself. So they imprisoned him and subjected him to torture and to it was a dungeon called Spalerka, the Spalerka prison. It was notorious for political dissidents and counter-revolutionaries, and they tried to break his spirit, and they sentenced him to death. Or actually, he narrowly survived the death sentence, very narrowly. There was an intense amount of international pressure, and it was actually a miracle also that took place. It was the Rebbe talked about it a lot. Our Rebbe, ultimately, he was released from prison on the 3rd of Tammuz, which was the end of June or beginning of July 1927, after several weeks of incarceration, and then they commuted his sentence to a lifetime of exile in a remote, Asian province called Kostroma, or city in, I think it was Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan. And he was sent there that next day, and then the sentence was commuted from lifetime to 3 years to 1 year. Ultimately, after a week and a half, just a week and a half in exile in Kostroma, he was completely liberated on the 13th of Tammuz, 12th and 13th of Tammuz, which is celebrated till this day as a great yontiv, as a great holiday amongst Chabad Chassidim.
I've gone to some Fabregans to celebrate.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Good for you with the Rebbe.
Yeah.
You met the Rebbe.
No, not with the Rebbe, but with another. Rabbi Gazinski, Rabbi Gazinski?
Yes, in Great Neck.
Yeah, you guys all know each other.
Yeah. No, I don't know him personally, but I've heard of him. I know him personally. Yeah. I don't know him personally. Anyway, yeah. So anyway, the end of the story is, why am I mentioning this? Because when he was released from prison, he had 1 day, he had a couple hours to be home. He was under heavy guard of the KGB or the NKVD and all these Russian police. He met with his family members, and then he was escorted to the train where he was going to go. He was going to go take this long, trip to this train journey to Kostroma, where they Chassidim knew they would probably never see him again, because at that time it was a lifetime thing, and they wanted to buy tickets on the train, and the Russian government prohibited anyone from buying tickets on the train. So he was escorted to the train station with his son-in-law, his future son-in-law, Rabbi Menachem Schneer, said our Rebbe, and his daughter and a couple other family members and a crowd of Chassidim and Jews who wanted to see him off. So he got onto the train, and before the train took leave, he addressed the crowd, and he said some very famous words. I'll just read one small paragraph for you. He said, he wrote that he started with a prayer, he invoked a prayer, and he said that here we raise our lips in prayer to God, etc. May God be with us as he was with our ancestors, to neither forsake nor abandon us. And he will in fact be with us, though our merit is not comparable to that of our ancestors, who endured intense self-sacrifice for the sake of Torah and its mitzvot, its commandments. And then he said this: we did not depart from the land of Israel of our own free will. Nor shall we return to the land of Israel by virtue of our own capabilities. God, our Father and King, has sent us into exile. He be blessed, shall redeem us and gather in the dispersed from the four corners of the earth, and will lead us back firmly and proudly by Mashiach, our righteous Redeemer. May this occur speedily in our times. However, now this is what I wanted to read here. However, may this, all the nations of the world must know the following: only our bodies were sent into exile and subjugated to alien rule. Our souls were not given over into captivity and foreign rule. We must proclaim openly and before all, unambiguously, that any matter affecting the Jewish religion, the Torah and its commandments and customs, is not subject to the coercion of others. No one may impose his belief upon us, nor coerce us to conduct ourselves contrary to our beliefs. It is our solemn and sacred task to cry out and state with the ancient steadfastness of the Jewish people, with courage derived from thousands of years of self-sacrifice: touch not my anointed, nor attempt to do evil to my prophets. This was a reference that one of the things that he had spoken over the last number of months before his arrest. The Talmud, the Gemara says that when God says, Al tigo b'mishichai, don't touch my anointed, but it's plural. It doesn't say Al tigo b'mishichi, don't touch my single anointed person like King David or King Saul or, Mashiach. But it says, Al tigo b'mishichai, don't touch my anointed ones. So the Talmud says this refers to Jewish school children. Tinoka shel beis rabbi. The children, the breath of their lips when they say words of Torah and prayer, that they are the anointed of God. And whoever messes and interferes with access of a Jewish child to study Torah in school with his peers, he is al tigo b'mishichai. He is messing with God's anointed. This was what the Rebbe's battle cry was the entire time. His talk goes on over here, but he and then he just ended off something interesting. He said, "Thus spoke one utterly willing to endure self-sacrifice." He was referring to his grandfather at the time of Tzedek. And we lack the minimal measure of courage to tell the world of the evil acts of a few hundred rampaging men, conspiring against Jewry and the faith of our people. This is what's happening in our times. This was about 94 years ago, and you would expect Chabad Chassidim, Chabad Rabbanim, like you mentioned, rabbis, to get the message after 94 years. We've been there and done that with religious persecution, and there's some type of a very strange disconnect, because I believe that a lot of it is people are somehow misconstrued our Rebbe's attitude to the United States and to Western governments, that the Rebbe has celebrated the refinement of the nations, the fact that the nations are now want to assist us in learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, and the Rebbe used to refer to the United States of America as a Medina Shel Chesed, a nation of built on kindness, which is true. However, not for one moment did the Rebbe ever suggest that anyone in our government or any public health ideologue has the imprimatur or the authority to make any decisions concerning Jewish observances. And this is what's happening now is just unspeakable and indefensible. And I've discussed this with doctors. I'll just give you an example. I mean, there's so much to say, but in a general, I would like to, in a nutshell, I had a podcast with some other rabbi last week. I don't know if you know his name. His name is David Lichtenstein. He's you wouldn't want to know him. He seems to be very far to the left politically. But I told him
he wouldn't want to know me.
Yeah, he wouldn't want to, exactly. He would cause him some ulcers. Actually, I think I'm going to call him. You should ask him.
Oh yeah.
So I told him that we're living in the times of religious persecution. So he said, what aspects of the Jewish religion are being persecuted? So I told him, I started to delineate to him, look, they're telling us that we cannot gather for a minyan. We can't gather for a minyan to say Kaddish. We can't gather for the mitzvah of visiting the sick. We can't escort the dead. We weren't able to for a long time. We cannot go to weddings. We cannot have weddings and invite our friends. We cannot, and he was trying to argue with me on all those things. And I said, look, the bottom line is, this past week in New York City, in Brooklyn, all the Jewish schools sent out letters to parents saying that your child cannot come to school unless the parent agrees unconditionally to have a third party or a member of the school administration randomly test your children weekly for this COVID PCR nasal test. I call it nasal rape. And if the parent doesn't agree to that, doesn't submit to that, then the children will not be allowed to come to school. So this is an example. So we know that the schools were shut down for months, and now the children are still being prevented from coming to school. Thousands of kids are now not going to school now because their parents will refuse to submit to allow their children to submit to this unjust test. So this is a very cynical distortion of Judaism when we have rabbis and principals, school principals, and administrators telling us that children may not come to school for no reason other than the fact that the government so willed it. That is a frontal attack on Judaism, on everything holy. And that is exactly what the Soviet Union did. It's exactly what the Marxist, it's right out of the Marxist playbook. And those who don't see it are just willfully ignorant.
Okay. So let me ask you this question. Sure. A lot of people attack you and they say you're crazy, you're an extremist. What is it that you say besides what you've said, so far, which I find relative to me to be very moderate?
Yeah.
What is it that you say that they could possibly object to?
Well, I mean, the people are accusing me, and several rabbis actually, several rabbis whom I know started a smear campaign against me personally on social media. Very shocked that they would resort to such lowly behavior. I think that what people are most frightened about, first of all, I'm challenging the authority of rabbis. So what I'm telling people is, just like you said in the name of Rav Kahana, if Rabbi Kahana said, if I come and tell you to go get baptized, I want you to tell me, hey, that is against the basic tenet of Judaism, and we're not going to listen to you because you're not God, right? You're a human being, you can make a mistake. Well, that's what the situation nowadays. So any rabbi who's telling you that you have to wear a mask, you have to conform with these Marxist draconian policies, child can't go to school for not having a vaccine for hepatitis B because the government said so, the almighty government said so. Any rabbi who says that should be defrocked, and he should not be listened to. His kashrut should be is not reliable. He's not a God-fearing person. He's sold out. He's been victim. He's been brainwashed by the ideological subversion and the times we're living in, and he's no longer has any rabbinic authority. And I say this openly, and that makes a lot of people very nervous because unfortunately unfortunately that this is the situation with the vast majority of rabbis nowadays. It's really very frightening.
What is it about the Jews that they're supposed to be a light unto the nations, which means a light to the Gentile nations, that the Jewish people were brought forth to accept the Torah and then spread the light of the Torah to the Gentiles, to the Goyim, as they say. And yet, I find Jews to be the most sheep-like people that I've ever encountered. And of course, I'm not talking about every Jew, but I'm certainly talking about the majority of Jews. What is it that they take the concept of being subservient to God and then somehow transmogrify God into the government, and they are more righteous towards the government and obey and pray to the government more than they are supposed to be praying to God. And I find this amongst Orthodox rabbis. People talk about, my background, which, as I said, deformed. And, with deformed rabbis, it's like the movies when they give you the disclaimer and they say, any similarity between this movie and real people is surely a coincidence or merely a coincidence.
Yeah.
The deformed rabbi is any similarity between what they tell you and Judaism is also purely mere coincidence. But I'm talking about the guys with black hats, the guys with beards like you, the guys that are wearing tzitzis, the guys that are going to shul 3 times a day. These people are all slaves. I hear very few rabbis like you. They do exist. There's a few on social media. But what is it? Is it something about Judaism? Is there something in the DNA of Jews? What is it that makes them more worshipful of the government than they are of the Almighty?
That's a good question. It's a painful question. I'll tell you what I think. I don't know. I'm sure there might be more to this. I believe that Jews suffer a collective historical PTSD, a transgenerational PTSD, and this was my understanding a year ago after I'd written to hundreds of rabbis worldwide, and very few were willing to speak up about the plight of 10,000 Jewish children in New York, thousands more in New Jersey, and many more in California. And I discovered something very frightening, actually, that many of these rabbis who were silent with these policies, with these unjust public health policies, they are living under a tremendous amount of fear of a not of a second Holocaust. They're living in fear of anti-Semitism and of violence against Jews. And just to give you I can't tell you how many rabbis admitted to me behind closed doors that they cannot advocate for these children who have been unjustly thrown out of school last year during the measles so-called outbreak, and after the measles outbreak. They threw kids out during the measles outbreak, but then outbreak was over in the fall or in the summer, and thousands of children still couldn't attend school. And I asked these rabbis, why aren't you speaking out? These Jewish children who can't learn Torah, that's our most precious, that's the most sacrosanct aspect of our religion. Why the silence? And I cannot tell you how many rabbis admitted to me behind closed doors that they were warned by public health officials that if there were an outbreak in a community, and in their community, in their religious community, in Muncie or in New York or Brooklyn or wherever else, and they were, and the outbreak occurred with children or with people in their community, and the government could point to it and say, see, they have lower vaccination rates. And then the media, and then they were warned, they were bullied by public health officials. They were warned that you don't want to be the one who's responsible for these outbreaks, for these diseases, and then you're going to be blamed for the disease, and rightfully so. And this is what happened a year ago, more than a year ago, 2 years ago, during the so-called measles outbreak in New York. And then we have all all the violence that occurred afterwards. And rabbis are having these horrific images in their mind of the Holocaust and of the Black Plague and of Stalinism, blaming Jews for disease. So therefore, they have to be, like you say, more righteous than the Pope. I don't know what the right word is. They have to be more. They have to
Catholic than the Pope.
More Catholic than the Pope. They have to be so. More pious, whatever the word is, more Catholic than the Pope.
He's not even so Catholic, but that's another story.
Okay, whatever. You don't understand the expression. I didn't mean so. For instance, so in other words, they have to be so vigilant about public health because we want to be on the forefront of public health. We have to be so vehement about how everyone has to vaccinate because we have to show the world that we care about everyone's health. God forbid, we're not going to cause anyone's disease. We're not going to, so. In a sense, this is what's happening with COVID also. I think that a lot of rabbis, they innocently conflated I think they conflate the concept of this COVID policy with what they call pikuach nefesh, which means that there's an obligation to save someone's life and to prevent illness and prevent death, and therefore under that false premise, under that distorted premise, then all of a sudden everything the government is doing must be for our good because the government cares about us. The public health, it's all about our health, and therefore, if they told us to wear a mask, we have to do it because, And I think that a lot of rabbis believe that to be the case. They don't, and therefore, and then all the other rabbis just blindly follow the leading rabbis, and then everyone just goes along with this. But really, what I've been trying to do is to get through to rabbis one by one, and it's challenging. It's really challenging, and especially when. I've been labeled anti-vaxxer, which isn't even true. But whatever they could do just to silence me. I'm anti-science and I'm a flat earther. I've been called all kinds of ridiculous things because simply because they don't want to address the facts. They want to silence me and stifle dissent, and that's very sad. That's in a very un-Jewish position.
And it's ironic that the same people who insist that a woman should be able to murder her baby from conception until it's actually born, they are the same people that talk about, I have control over my own body, but you're going to wear a mask and you're going to stay inside your house.
Right, yeah.
And now in Australia, they've got it to the point where you're only allowed out of your house for 1 hour a day. And the only place where that's the case is in a prison, where the prisoners are all allowed out for recreation, play basketball, whatever, lift weights for an hour a day. And the only reason why that's not happening here yet is in Australia, they succeeded in taking away all the guns. But in America, it's a different story, especially with the Gentiles, many of whom I know very well, who are very heavily armed. And as Rabbi Kahana said, he had a great line. He said, for every Jew, they should have a 22.
Right.
It's a 45, but it doesn't rhyme with
45 or a 9mm. Right. Bob, yesterday, I don't know if I told you, yesterday I think I told you, it's the first time in my life that I attended I've been to other political rallies, but I've recently told anyone who asks me that whoever asks me to speak, wherever and whenever, I will speak about my favorite topic, religious freedom and medical freedom, without getting political, specifically political about parties. So I was asked to speak at a rally in Boston. It was a pro-Trump rally, and the official title of the rally was "They're opposed to Democrat violence," and a non-Jewish fella asked me to speak, and I said I'm happy to speak. I said I'm not going to mention any party by name, any candidate by name, but I'm going to talk about this topic. And he said fine, and I went there, and that's when I was calling. That's when I spoke to you on the phone, and what happened? I've never experienced this in my life. I came a little late because it was hard for me to park, and I had to go through a crowd of a lot of angry people wearing black. I discovered later that they were all the Black Lives Matter counter protest, screaming obscenities and blasting tubas and loud instruments and loud things. And there were hundreds of people like that, and they were all. I don't like to focus on skin color, but they were all white people, white young people, with tattoos and really rough looking people.
All brainwashed communists. Ironically, the founding fathers of America were fairly well steeped in understanding Judaism.
Right.
And, Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence writes that we are endowed by our creator. We're endowed by our creator, not by a politician, by our creator, with certain unalienable rights, among them the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Right.
When they say a right is unalienable, it means that it inheres in you as a God-created human being.
Right.
And something can't be alienated. It can't be leased. It can't be rented. It can't be subleased. It can't be taken away. It is part of you.
Right.
And when you say that for a so-called emergency, and I have quite a bit of skepticism about how much of an emergency this is, but even if it was an emergency, you do not violate basic principles based on the principle that we got to do anything to avoid the emergency.
Right.
You could argue under the guise of nefesh b'nefesh, which is a Jewish concept for the Gentile friends who are watching,
right,
says, you got to put life first. Well, under that theory, the Jews should never fight back, because after all, if they didn't resist, only they would be killed.
Right.
So you can use nefesh b'nefesh for any issue.
No, actually, you can't actually. So what I've been saying all along, I was going to tell you about the rally, but I'll tell you after.
I'm saying use it in the way they're using it.
No, it's a mistake. It's a grave mistake. First of all, there was a famous rabbi he's known as the name of his book, Chazon Ish, and rabbi also lived about 100 years ago. He wrote that sakanas nefashos, that the mitzvah of saving a life is not the highest, is not the highest value in the Jewish religion. It's way up there. But there are values in life that transcend life itself, and freedom is one of those values. The Chazon Ish wrote that the pikuach nefesh is doiche kol hater kula, but it's not oiker kol hater kula, which means to say that Rabbi Akiva was. Do you hear me? Okay, it says my internet is
I hear you.
You hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Rabbi Akiva, we lived in times of Roman persecution, and the Romans prohibited teaching Torah to children and students, and Rabbi Akiva flaunted the laws and taught Torah to children. And people asked him, well, why are you doing that? Why are you unrisking your life? And Rabbi Akiva said that, and he said, what about pikuach nefesh? What about nefesh? What about saving lives? You're endangering lives. So Rabbi Akiva said, if we succumb, we give in, and we stop learning Torah, then we're for sure lost. In other words, we kihem chayenu v'orech yameinu. We cannot kowtow to government policies that concern our religious freedoms and our essential human liberties. Breathing without obstruction is an essential human liberty. There's no government in the world that's allowed to. You're an attorney, so you know this. Actually, when I spoke yesterday, I was telling you at this rally, and everyone, all the guys who were there, all the people who were there, it was an incredible crowd. I finally got into the crowd of people of Trump supporters, and it was amazing that they asked me to speak. I didn't mention Trump's name. And I didn't say anything about Democrats or Republicans. I just spoke about medical freedom, religious freedom, and I said, we're going to go to vote this week, next week, and we have to vote for medical and religious freedom. I said, and you figure out what that means, And what happened was, meanwhile, the people across the street, there were hundreds of BLM people, if you want to call them people, and they were screaming obscenities at me, calling me a fascist. And I said, it's funny you call me a fascist because my grandfather's entire family was murdered by fascists. Now you're calling me a fascist, But what happened was, it was really frightening because there was some violence going on, and there were lots and lots of cops with riot gear. And I told one of the organizers, I said, aren't you guys a little scared? There's only 100 of you. There must be 500 of them, and there's only 100 cops here to protect you. And these people, the Trump supporters, they said to Rabbi, I said, well, we're not worried at all. So we don't even need the cops here. He said, each one of us is armed to the tooth. He said, we wish the cops wouldn't be here. These guys would be dead. We're not scared of them. And after feeling very unsafe for the first couple minutes after I heard that, I felt extremely safe amongst those patriots. But what I wanted to mention was, what I told them was that we have a concept in law, in American law, that when the government, like you said, we have a Bill of Rights, and the Bill of Rights does not give us any rights. It safeguards those rights that are God-given. So the Fifth Amendment is there to stop the government from interfering in our rights. Now, in order for the government to interfere in our rights because of, in the name of a pandemic or in the name of public health or whatever they're going to claim, they need to exercise what's called strict scrutiny. Strict scrutiny, which means that it can't just be moderate scrutiny. In other words, you know the legal terminology better than anyone.
Yeah.
The concept for now, the state of New York has tried to ban mitzvah b'peh, one of the aspects of circumcision. And the reason why the judge struck it down is because the Department of Health, if they make policies in the community, in the state, that's fine. But as soon as they try to interfere with someone's religious freedoms or essential human freedoms, it requires strict scrutiny. That means to say that they have to prove scientifically that.
Rabbi, let me interrupt you 1 second. The strict scrutiny is a Supreme Court invention as a standard when you could violate. In reality, Supreme Court decisions mean nothing because they're not the Constitution. They're what a bunch of judges make up about the Constitution. It is absolute, and you don't need strict scrutiny or any other scrutiny. They cannot interfere. It says.
Well, for example.
Yeah. Congress shall make no law, First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or abridging that.
Well, I hear you. But for example, the people would say, well, what about what they call female circumcision, which is mutilation? So should that be legal because that's their religious? Let's say there's a religion that practices that terrible practice. So I would say no, that should be banned. That they have that's their religious ritual, but that there's strict scrutiny that we could scientifically show that women who've undergone that surgery as children that is adversely affected their health for life in a very concrete physical way. Now, male circumcision, bris milah, even though countries in Europe have tried to ban it, and psychology will say whatever they want and all their psychobabble, like we mentioned before, but there's nothing they can't show us scientifically empirical. There's no empirical evidence that any male who's been circumcised, like the bris milah, has suffered any actual scientifically verifiable diagnosed problems because of the bris, if it was done correctly. And that really touches on the whole issue here with the COVID policies, because the entire COVID policy, like your governor said recently, it was all based on fear and bad science. There is no shred of actual scientific empirical evidence there, not with regards to masks. And they're going to say, oh, well, social policy, social distancing. They say things like, well, they publish all these studies. But if you read the studies, all the CDC and the WHO and all their studies that encourage what they call safe social distancing, I hate that expression. You know that if you read the studies, and I've read them. I've read hundreds and hundreds of pages because I want to see for myself. There is not a shred of actual scientific evidence, what we call empirical evidence, that's proven that the asymptomatic transmission even exists. And all of their papers, all their studies is all based on statistical mathematical models. And that is the same pseudoscience they used a year and a half ago when they threw kids out of school. Because there's something called pre-symptomatic transmission of measles, and a child's not vaccinated. They raised the specter of doubt, and there's a higher. But all of this is speculative. It's all statistical speculation, and it's not scientific. Statistical science is not a real science. The Lubavitcher Rebbe used to say that he was a man who loved science, and he went to university. He was an engineer, and he conversed with the greatest of scientists. I spoke to some of the scientists he conversed with. He used to say that there are fields of science nowadays which he called it pseudoscience, and one of those was cosmology. Cosmology, he said, that's not science, because science is about empirical evidence. Show me the empirical evidence. If there's no empirical evidence, then it's all speculative. That falls in the realm of belief. That's a belief. That's a religious belief. That's not science. And masks, there's not a shred of scientific empirical evidence that mask that people are wearing, that any one person is posing a risk to anyone else by not wearing a mask. It's fake. And the problem now is, now look, if you think that it's going to protect you by wearing an N95 mask, or you feel safer wearing a mask, then gesundheit hate. You could do what you want. It's a free country. The moment you try to force that mask onto my face or my 2-year-old, I'll just illustrate how ridiculous this is. They tell us here, I don't know how it is in New York, but here in my state, we call it Massachusetts. Here in Massachusetts, there's a law that you cannot, a 2-year-old in public goes into a store, has to wear a mask. A 2-year-old. I have a daughter, she's 4, and we have a little boy, he's 2, little babies. And I've been asked to leave stores. I've been asked to take them out of stores. And in fact, I'd like to discuss with you if there's a possibility of suing these stores for violating my civil liberties. And because I refuse to put a mask on my 2-year-old. Now, I couldn't understand where's the seichel, where's the wisdom in this? So I spoke to my liberal friends, my friends who are proponents of COVID, COVID policy. And I said, show me the data, show me the proof. What's the reason for this policy? So they said, well, there's asymptomatic transmission with children. So I researched it, and guess what? First, I started reading. I read something that was said by Dr. Fauci himself, that asymptomatic transmission has never been a factor in any outbreak of disease in history, and it will not be the case with COVID either. So what's the problem here? If there's no asymptomatic transmission, the fear is what they call pre-symptomatic transmission, right? Pre-symptomatic. So what that means, what pre-symptomatic transmission is it's also a misnomer. What that means is that they're worried that there's someone who he got the virus, the so-called virus, and he got sick, right? But he doesn't have full-blown symptoms yet. He has very light symptoms. Maybe he has a little nuisance of a cough, or maybe he has a little headache or sore throat, but he doesn't think it's anything serious. He doesn't think it's a garden variety cold. He doesn't think it's anything. And that person might be contagious for the first day or two before experiencing full-blown symptoms. So they call that pre-symptomatic transmission. And that's what they're concerned about. That's why they want people to wear masks. So then I started researching further, and I read that, lo and behold, children under 9 years old have an infinitesimal chance of ever showing symptoms for this disease. Children under 18 or 19 have a 99.99 something % chance of never being symptomatic. So then I called my friend, a doctor, locally, and I said, well, wait a second. If my 2-year-old, my 4-year-old can never be symptomatic, then doesn't that mean by definition that he or she also cannot be pre-symptomatic, right? Doesn't that make sense? So he said, yes, absolutely, that's correct. So I said, well, now let me get this straight. We're told that there's no such thing as asymptomatic transmission is very rare, and that's not the reason why anyone has to wear a mask. A child can't be symptomatic, and therefore he can't be pre-symptomatic. So why are we making 2-year-olds wear masks? And why do I see parents, their children are screaming and kicking, and they're forcing a mask? Child abuse to these poor children. I heard of a case in Boston and a case in Chicago of a 5-year-old child who was forced into isolation for 2 weeks in the basement without seeing any human contact for 2 weeks. Why are we abusing children if these children have no symptoms and there's no scientific reason, medical reason for why we should be treating them with such abusive policies? So you know what the doctors answered me, my friends, they didn't say this publicly. We never say it publicly. He said, you're right, Rabbi, 100%. He said, this is all part of their policy because they want uniformity. They want everyone to conform. And therefore, if we're going to allow some people in the society not to wear masks, then other people might not wear masks. So therefore, we're going to make it a blanket policy. And then it occurred to me that these policies have nothing to do with actual science. It's all a political agenda. It's an agenda, whatever one you call it. Let's, even if you want to go that far down the rabbit hole, I call it the rabbi hole. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's a policy. The public health policy is not about what is actually medically or scientifically sound or advisable. And therefore the Torah doesn't acknowledge that, as it has no validity in Jewish law at all, because it's just a political policy. And it would be like the government coming to tell me that, we're going to make a law that everyone has to work on Shabbos. Well, excuse me, my religion tells me not to work on Shabbos, and I will risk my life to keep my traditions intact. So, and it's the same exact thing when the government tells me to put a mask on myself or my child. No, I have an essential. Yeah.
Do you say these things to people in shul when you go to shul for Shabbat or whatever?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And absolutely, I say.
Go ahead. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I say actually, but you know what happened? I was gonna say I say these things regularly. Everyone who knows me knows I say these things. But the thing is that a lot of people, said they stopped coming to shul, but they stopped coming to shul because of COVID. Not only that, I see, Bob. I don't know how far down the rabbit hole you are, but I'll tell you how far I am. I will not agree to have shul outside. When our governor put a ban on non-essential, quote unquote, non-essential religious services and prayer service, communal prayer. It was back in March, or the end of March, or the beginning of April. I don't remember when it was. It was the end of March. I called up our local board of health. There's a doctor who's the head of our board of health here in Massachusetts, in our town, Westboro. I called him up and I said, I just want to let you know, students shouldn't be alarmed, that we are intending to keep our doors open and we will be having services every Saturday like we always had. And he said, well, didn't you hear the governor made an order? The governor said, no, non-essential, all religions, all religious house of worship have to stop all non-essential functions. And I said, yeah, but communal prayer is essential for us. Prayer is essential. Shul attendance, synagogue attendance is essential, and therefore it's essential. So we'll continue it, just like the governor said. Essential functions have to continue, and we're going to continue our essential functions. So this guy, not Jewish, he said, oh, 100%. If you put it that way, then he gave me his blessings. He said the only thing he asks is if you could please stay 6 feet apart and try to keep the policies. I said, no, we will not be doing that. I said, because there's part of our services where we have to be together. I said, we have to dance, we have to sing, and that these are all essential for us. He said, okay, well, nothing he could say. If that's the way you put it, then fine, so be it. But see that, and that's
when a Jew is a proud Jew like you,
yeah,
even the goyim want to be Jewish. That's what happens. It happens all the time. Really, I've had many goyim to me, Bob, you make me want to feel Jewish.
Yeah.
Make me want to be Jewish. It's a very funny thing. So, you'll hear Jews all the time saying, they used to tell me when I had a television show, you are the cause of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
I'm the cause of it. They would tell Rabbi Kahn all the time, he's the cause of
it's just the opposite. It's exactly the opposite. And I can tell you real life cases, but I can tell you there's a very prominent, one of the most prominent shuls in the country, a big Orthodox shul in Boca Raton. The rabbis there wrote to the state Senate in Florida asking for the elimination of religious exemption. They asked for the Senate of Florida to force all children in the state to be vaccinated, all these morally dubious vaccines. And these two rabbis, you know what happened? A woman called me in a panic, and she said she was on a group in a social media group where there were people who were so upset, and they said that how dare this rabbi interfere in our freedoms, and we want to burn his church, we want to burn down his synagogue. And this lady called me that in a panic. I said, give me the names of the people on the social media. Let me reach out to them. Let me explain to them that it's not all the Jewish people. It's some stupid rabbis, and don't burn the shul down. They should be defrocked. They're bad people, but the shul shouldn't be burned down. And then I engaged these people. And I spoke to them, and they said, yeah, we shouldn't have said that. We were just upset. But those rabbis are causing anti-Semitism. And do you know what's happening now? See, what's going to happen is there's going to be a revolution. I don't know how it wants some form or the other. Americans are not going to put up with this, and guess what? The Jews who are all part of these police, what I call them the mask Gestapo, forcing people to wear masks and forcing people to social distance. The Jews were on the forefront of this and trying to spearhead this, and all the Jews who were involved with this unjust public health policies. They're going to be the cause of untold anti-Semitism. But I just want to tell you, the end of what happened was, unfortunately, a lot of people stopped coming to shul because they got scared. We never closed their doors for a moment. And there were weeks that when I was sitting in shul, I was the only one, but I still had shul open, 10 a.m. And I got to tell you two things really interesting. The first thing that happened was there were actually 3 people who were still coming to shul on a regular basis. One of them was a really big follower, Rabbi Kahana, who he carried, and he came to shul every Shabbos. And he told me himself, he said, listen, Rabbi, I said, I'm only coming to you because your shul is open. He said, because at one time I asked him, what do you think about if we made shul outdoors to get a couple more people to come? Maybe we'll have a minyan, because here indoors where it's only 4 of us. If I make shul in the side yard and social distance and allow people to stand afar. So he said, no, he wouldn't come to a shul like that. That's not a shul. He wants to come to shul. He doesn't care if there's no minyan. He wants to come to shul. And I realized at that point that I decided the same thing. I'm not going to acknowledge this. I don't care if they stop coming. I don't care if I'm the last person in my shul. But here's what happened. So a couple weeks into this, a fellow came to Shul, and there was, I knew that it was going to be only me, him, and a third guy that week. It was at the end of April, after Pesach probably, or maybe I don't remember when it was, it was around 10 a.m. and I was running a little late, and I was walking over to Shul, and my kids told me that this fellow Tim, he wasn't feeling good, and he lied down on the sofa in the Shul, in the back of the Shul, and so I said, they should go get him a drink, make sure he's okay. And I didn't want to bother him. So I sat in the side yard and I sat down and I started, davening. I thought maybe he's sick. I didn't want to bother him. I walked into Shul 20 minutes later to check on him, and he was collapsed on the floor. I started to panic. I said, what is it? And of course, rushing through my mind, it must be COVID. What should I do? I asked him, are you okay? And what happened? He said, he feels very dizzy. And I didn't know what to do, because I was hearing all these horrific stories about how people are being left to die and mistreated in the hospitals in New York, and I didn't want to send him to the hospital if he had COVID. I didn't know what to do. So fortunately, I was getting all nervous, and I didn't know what to do. And then he said he got very disoriented, and he was walking out of Shul to go back to his car, and he was dizzy. And I said, no, I can't let you drive. You're dizzy. It's dangerous. He almost collapsed again in front of his car, and in the street outside, and I caught him. At that point, my wife was walking by, and she sees, and she said, you got to call ambulance right away, because he looks like his right side his right hand his face is drooping, and he could be having a stroke. So we got someone to bring a phone quick. We called 911. They were here. They were there. The paramedics were there in 2 minutes. They right away said, they see he's having a stroke. Put him on a stretcher, and this is also a person who carries. So he gave me his firearm, because he didn't want the paramedics to get it. So I held on to it for him, and he was taken to the ambulance, and he left. And we were feeling very nervous about the whole thing. We were praying, saying psalms for him, and praying for him. So after Shabbos was over, we get a phone call from a nurse. And the nurse said that he had given permission to the nurse to call us. He just wants us to know that we're okay, that he's okay. That the nurse said, but he told that he had his permission to tell you about his medical condition. He suffered a massive stroke. He was a young man he's a young man in his mid-50s. His sister had just died of a stroke 2 years before that. It was a congenital. They have a hereditary condition where they have constricted capillaries in their brain. And he had a massive stroke, and it was fortunate that he had the stroke where he was in Shul, and they took him right to the hospital. They put him under, they gave him medication, they put an emergency surgery, they put a stent in his brain, they saved his life. They said, and the nurse told me, and then the next day another nurse called, and the day after that a doctor called. They said, Rabbi, you have no idea, this person is only alive because he came to Shul on Shabbos. If he would have been alone in his apartment,
right, you saved
only alive. Yes. Coming to Shul on Shabbos morning in the middle of COVID, he saved his life. They said, and the doctor told me, he said, it's kind of funny because they're telling everyone to save lives and practice social distancing and stay home, but this is clearly the exception to that. He said, well, so I told you.
Rabbi, we're way over time, but I let it go.
Sorry.
Time. It's all right, because you're so great that I could talk to you.
Yeah.
But we're way beyond the normal time, and I want to continue our hopefully friendship and our conversation, and maybe even come visit you on a Shabbos up
Sure.
Massachusetts, and it would be an honor.
Bob, are you going to be in? Yeah, that would be an honor. We'd love to meet you. Bob, are you? I know that there's supposed to be some sort of rally in Lawrence. Is that near you, Lawrence, New York?
Lawrence, Long Island. That's a South Shore. Yeah,
South Shore, and it's going to be this Sunday.
I was at the rally in Borough Park last week. With Heshi Tischler. I had him on the show.
Yeah.
In fact, he was on the show, did a great interview, and he was arrested. Wow. The minute he finished his interview with me, the police came into his house and arrested him and put him in handcuffs. Not because he was talking to me, although for them that should be enough. But are you going to?
Yes, I'm going. I'm going to be there on Sunday. I think it starts at 11 a.m. Yeah, and not only that, I'm bringing a friend of mine. I got them to get. They called me. They called me. They're looking for speakers. So a friend of mine who's actually a black minister in Hartford is also going to be there. A wonderful person. Also,
I'm gonna go. You're gonna. Can you email me the details?
Yes, I'll send it to you. Yeah, I'll send you the link. It's in I know it's starting 11 a.m. in Lawrence, but I'll send you the address.
Good. We'll have two troublemakers there.
Very good, very good. Look forward to meeting you in person then.
Yes. Well, God bless you. Thank you so much for being on the show. It was a real honor. And may you be fruitful and multiply more of you.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. God bless you too. You too, Bob.
Take care, man.
Take care.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.